Yeah. My name is Sanjeewa. I am from Sri Lanka. I'm working in this movement with international NGO called International Bridges to Justice, based in Geneva. IBJ work in about 37 countries in the world, and our main mission is to prevent torture from happening, especially at the investigation and the arrest stage by the police. With relation to that, we have been training lawyers to be there at the early stage to prevent torture. Yeah. Before that, let me explain a little bit about the work of the organization. We work. I was talking yesterday during the workshop about particular examples of China and Cambodia. And the important thing is, like, we often talk about children and children in justice sector, justice system, and often many organizations talk about after all the violations happen to children. Our work is more before that, because especially if child need a lawyer, often children get access to a lawyer at the trial stage in the court. But what about before that, when a child is taken to the police station and questioned? Often nobody is present, and many children have been tortured. I've talked about example of a child in Sri Lanka who has been severely tortured for something that he has not done, and he was so much tortured that he couldn't use his hands because of the nature of the torture. The question is why the child was alone at the time. Why at least a lawyer or a social worker or someone was not present. So our work is with relation to how to prevent it even before the violation happen. And we have proven through our work it is possible. Particularly a lawyer's presence, police will not use torture or treatment of degrading inhuman work. So that's the main message. We know that torture can be prevented. Children from being tortured can be prevented. And we have developed a model, and it has worked in China, in difficult countries like China, and in Cambodia, in many other countries, Burundi, Zimbabwe, Rwanda, and India. The important thing is that the world community need to come to realization that it is important to access children and also accused children at the earliest possible stage before they go through the trauma and torture. And this is possible. And we have developed a lot of recommendations, laws, which are on the books in different countries. But it is the time to talk about implementation of them and how lawyers and judges, prosecutors can work together to implement them. To answer your last question about what I learned from this Congress, I think this Congress is a very focus on practical issues. When I spoken at early stage with Bernard Burton about the conference, he's told me this Congress is not about laws and theories but how to resolve actual issues and practice. As I've seen a number of workshops and speeches, they talk about good practices and how to move forward with good practices. I think should be the actual kind of aim of big Congress like this should be to move forward. I hope this Congress could move more on practical issues and come up with more practical solutions to real issues like how to prevent and how to look at existing good practices models like what IBJ has been working on in a number of countries, and to see how to integrate them so that violations can be prevented, children can be prevented from going through trauma and violations through early access to them, especially by lawyers. For example, in China, we have worked in a number of provinces in collaboration with the justice officials to see how we could have access to a child at the stage of investigation by the police. And this has changed the perception, and the actual number of arrest warrants against children have dramatically reduced, especially like in Chongqing. It has become the lowest in the country, arrest warrants against children. It's 40%. And this has been from earlier 70% to 40%. It means the lawyers working with the prosecutors, police, to make sure that actual investigation is done properly and correctly can prevent even a child from being arrested. So this is very, very important. If you can prevent a child from being arrested, the child doesn't need to go through the detention or the trial and the trauma and sometimes torture during the investigation. And I think these kind of models are very, very important, and how and this is possible, first of all, and we have worked in countries like China, and also involving adults to be present during investigation. We have developed a model called, I think commonly known, called appropriate adults. So adults, trained social workers and adults doing investigation into child's background, so that if a child is really in trouble in front of the judge, that kind of a social background investigations can help child not to be sent to prison, but to be sent to another diversions like the community service, not to be locked up. So I think a lot of important things have to happen at the early stage. That's the thing. In Cambodia, for example, we know that 87% of cases that we have done about 5,000 cases, are at the earliest possible stage, early stage of investigation. And we know when we intervene at the early stage, we have seen 23% of the cases were dropped, not even charged, and children were not, and 28% of the children were bailed out, so they were not in detention. So we can see 50% of the child cases were not, the children even didn't go through the whole process, and they were taken out of the process, and then they could be with their families. So this was done through proactive work of lawyers. So we do training of lawyers, not just lawyers to, very often we think lawyers know the law, but actually knowing the law itself is not enough. We need lawyers to know the actual particular skills. We need lawyers to understand how the accused person feel, like children. And the lawyers need to do something more to their society. So we need to train lawyers to be committed to the social causes like children and the prevention of torture. So training of lawyers is a very important part. IBJ itself has trained over 22,000 lawyers around the world. We have done about 30,000 cases, and we work in collaboration with lawyers have worked in collaboration with the police prosecution to get the maximum kind of output out of their work. So I think what I am telling is this model is very important and it is possible. So you need a kind of paradigm shift to think about how to do an early intervention. We talk about it, but how to do it, and we have developed the model, and I think it is important everyone to look at it and see how they could use it in their own work.